The perfect family doesn't exist, but the Maguire household certainly made you believe otherwise. What you're about to witness is not just a story, but a warning, a testament to how quickly perfection can shatter into irreparable pieces. Stay with me until the very end, because this tale of betrayal will reveal how even the strongest foundations can crumble when trust is broken. The Maguire home stood proudly in a quiet suburb, a traditional two-story house surrounded. The lawn remained meticulously trimmed, the porch lights consistently welcoming, and the interior resonated with the kind of genuine laughter that made visitors believe nothing could ever go wrong in such a place. Bear Maguire, 45 years old, was the eldest of four brothers and the unshakable pillar of the family. Born to a factory worker and a school teacher, he learned discipline and responsibility from an early age. By his early 30s, he had established a successful logistics company with his brothers by his side. Bear married Fiona when he was 26. She was a compassionate nurse with a magnetic personality and unwavering moral compass. Together they raised Sierra, their beautiful, intelligent, and soft-spoken only daughter who had just turned 19. She had always been the center of their world, nurtured with love, discipline, and trust. Living under one roof were Bear, Fiona, their daughter Sierra, and Hebert's three younger brothers, Luke, 39, Phil, 37, and Cameron, 35, along with their respective wives and children. It was a large family, sometimes chaotic, but always warm and connected. Sunday brunches filled the house with noise and joy. Late-night card games in the living room, backyard barbecues, and birthdays that resembled small festivals created memories that strengthened their bonds. They seemed to have everything a family could want. The house itself had evolved into a fortress of cherished memories. The kitchen still bore a crack on the tile from when Sierra had dropped a bowl while helping her mother bake her 10th birthday cake. The banister on the stairs carried the initials of all the cousins who had once used it as their personal graffiti wall. Even a slightly out-of-tune piano in the corner was sacred, a wedding gift from Bear to Fiona. Despite their closeness, each family member respected boundaries. The Maguire household was spacious enough for privacy, yet the doors were never closed for too long. There existed a natural openness that flowed through their home, both emotionally and physically. Sierra, in particular, was the jewel of the family. Her uncles adored her. Luke often called her Little Star, a nickname from when she was a toddler who loved sneaking out at night to gaze at the stars. Phil would assist her with college assignments whenever she struggled, and Cameron made it his personal mission to bring her favorite cinnamon rolls every Friday evening. To outsiders, they were the perfect family. Even within their neighborhood, the Maguires were known as the family who had figured out the secret to happiness. People admired their unity, their strong male role models, and the fierce love Fiona radiated as both mother and wife. But perfection is often just a mask. Behind the laughter, beneath the surface of stability, a storm was silently brewing. Hey there, I know you're hooked on this story already, so take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and activate the notification bell. You won't want to miss future true stories like this one. Your support means everything, and it takes just a moment. Now, let's get back to the Maguire family as their perfect world begins to unravel. Everything began to change slowly, in whispers rather than thunderclaps. In early spring, the family received an invitation to a destination wedding from a cousin who lived in a neighboring state. The event was expected to last at least a week, and almost everyone was excited. Fiona was already planning outfits and packing bags while Bear coordinated the logistics with military-like precision. However, Sierra had her final board exam scheduled during that same week. As a dedicated student, she had no intention of missing them and insisted she would stay home to prepare in peace. Fiona hesitated, but Bear reassured her. "She's not a child anymore," he said gently, his hand resting on Fiona's shoulder. "She's strong and focused. Besides, we're only a phone call away." Coincidentally, Luke, Phil, and Cameron also decided to stay behind. Their schedules at the company were packed, and they volunteered to handle business matters while Bear was away. This arrangement raised no alarms. The Maguires trusted each other beyond question. Luke even promised Bear, "I'll treat her like my own daughter," with a reassuring smile. Nothing to worry about. And Bear believed him. Why wouldn't he? Before leaving, Fiona cooked enough meals to last days and filled the refrigerator with all of Sierra's favorites: pasta, steamed fish, lemon rice, and slices of apple pie. She kissed her daughter on the forehead, held her close, and said, "We'll be back before you know it. Keep the doors locked, no late nights, and call me before you sleep every night." Sierra smiled, hugged her mother tightly, and nodded in agreement. Bear handed her some cash for emergencies, made her promise to focus on her studies, and walked out the door with a suitcase in one hand and pride in his heart. As their car pulled away, Sierra stood at the porch waving goodbye. Luke watched from the upstairs window, his face unreadable. That was the last day the Maguire family felt normal. Over the next few days, nothing on the surface seemed wrong. Sierra studied for hours, occasionally stepping out for short walks. Luke and his brothers returned late from work, or so it appeared. There were polite nods, occasional shared meals at the dining table, and exchanges of good morning and good night. But something unspoken was shifting. A small fracture had begun forming within the foundation of the family. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was silent, like a whisper in the dark. The house during those days felt emptier than usual, not in the literal sense, but something unspoken hung in the air. With most of the family away attending the wedding, the echoes of laughter were replaced by silence. The once bustling kitchen held no more morning chaos. The living room television played on mute for hours. The comforting aroma of Fiona's cooking was absent. Only the occasional sound of Sierra's footsteps or the distant humming from the upstairs bedrooms filled the void. Sierra spent most of her time in her room or on the terrace, buried in textbooks and notes. Her exams meant everything to her. She had always been an achiever, and Hebert's dreams for her education were deeply rooted in pride and legacy. But even the strongest routines can falter when the normal pattern is broken. On the second day, an incident occurred. Small, sudden, and innocent on the surface, but enough to tilt the axis of trust. Sierra had just returned from her exam. She was exhausted. After taking a warm shower, she changed into a loose t-shirt and left the bathroom door slightly open to let the steam escape. Unbeknownst to her, Luke, returning from work early that day, entered her floor looking for his charger which he had left in the guest room. He absent-mindedly pushed her half-closed bathroom door open, expecting it to be empty. And then he froze. Sierra, standing there in nothing but a towel, turned abruptly, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, both stood stunned, her skin still glistening from the shower, hair wet and tousled. She grabbed the towel tighter around herself. "Uncle Luke!" she exclaimed, startled by his presence. Luke muttered a barely audible, "I'm so sorry," turned pale, and immediately fled the room. Sierra shut the door quickly, locking it this time. Her heart pounded in her chest. It had been a genuine accident. At least she hoped so. But something about Luke's face before he left disturbed her. The way his eyes lingered for that split second too long. She brushed it off that night, told herself not to overthink it. Maybe it really was just a mistake. But the next morning at breakfast, she caught him staring. Not obviously, but his eyes would glance up from his coffee mug, settle on her, then quickly dart away whenever she looked back. It happened again later when she went to the kitchen to grab some snacks. She felt his presence more than saw it, watching her from the hallway, just outside her line of sight. She grew increasingly uncomfortable. The days passed, her exams continued, and though Luke never repeated the mistake of walking in again, something in his demeanor had changed. He was softer in tone, overly polite, and often asked if she needed help or wanted anything. On the day Sierra's final exam ended, she returned home in the late afternoon, triumphant. The last paper had gone better than expected. She threw her bag on the couch and allowed herself a moment to breathe. Luke, who had come home early that day, heard the door and walked out of the kitchen. "You're done?" he asked, holding a half-filled glass of wine. "Yeah," Sierra smiled, unaware of the tension slowly threading its way into the space between them. Luke looked at her with a different kind of expression. Not that of an uncle, not of a guardian, but something else entirely. He raised his glass. We should celebrate. Sierra laughed awkwardly. Celebrate? I don't think I'm allowed to drink. You're 19, Luke said, walking over and handing her the glass. You're an adult. One drink isn't going to hurt. She hesitated. It felt strange, but Luke always had a way of making everything sound casual, harmless, normal. One, she said firmly. That's it. But one turned into two, two into three. They moved from the kitchen to the living room. The conversation lightened. They laughed about awkward professors, childhood stories, even about how strict Bear was during her childhood. The alcohol loosened both their tongues. And then the conversation turned darker, more personal. Luke mentioned the day he walked in on her by accident. Sierra gave a nervous smile, saying, Let's forget that happened. Luke leaned in slightly, his voice dropping lower. I can't. I still see that image. It's burned into my brain. Sierra stared at him, stunned by his confession. Uncle Luke, don't call me that right now, he whispered. Her breathing grew shallow. She should have stood up. She should have left. But the wine made her slower, her mind hazier, and somewhere twisted and buried deep in the confusion of emotions, she didn't completely recoil. That scared her more than anything else. I knew you were looking at me weird since that day, she mumbled. I tried to stop, he said, but I couldn't. What do you want? Sierra asked, her voice barely audible. Luke leaned in closer, his lips almost touching her ear. I want to see you like that again. Sierra blinked. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded. Then, as if to test reality, she slowly stood up, grabbed the hem of her t-shirt, and lifted it just an inch. Not much, just enough. Luke's breath hitched, and then the boundary was broken. What happened that night wasn't love. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even seduction. It was something sick and twisted, driven by vulnerability, confusion, and predation. They slept together. It wasn't passionate or beautiful. It was desperate, wrong, and silent. The next morning, Sierra woke up first, naked under a blanket. Her body ached, not from pleasure, but from confusion and guilt. She turned to see Luke still asleep beside her, and suddenly bile rose in her throat. She got up, dressed quickly, and left the room. For hours, she sat in her bathroom, shivering not from cold but from the weight of what had happened. But then Luke knocked. He came in, speaking softly, not blaming, not aggressive. He made her feel less guilty about it. He said they were both lonely, that maybe they needed each other, that it was their secret, and somehow, she agreed. What had started as a one-time mistake turned into a twisted connection. The next time they met, it was more coordinated. Luke would come home early, pretend to be working in the study, and when the house was quiet, they would disappear into each other's company. A week later, it wasn't just Luke who knew. Phil came home early one day and found them together. The confrontation was explosive. What the hell is this? Phil shouted, his voice shaking with rage. Luke froze. Sierra covered herself, her face burning with shame. Phil stood in silence, processing what he'd just seen. Sierra cried. Luke tried to explain, and then Cameron walked in, hearing the commotion. He too witnessed the fallout, and the already shattered room fractured further. We're going to tell Bear, Phil finally said. No, please, Sierra begged. Please don't. I'll do anything. Please don't destroy this family. Those words, I'll do anything, hung in the room like a loaded weapon. Cameron looked at Phil, and something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness. It was temptation. And within hours, Phil and Cameron became part of the secret. The shame turned into perversion. The three brothers, once protectors, became predators. And Sierra, once the pride of the family, became their shared secret. It wasn't love. It wasn't desire. It was evil. By the end of that seventh day, everything that once made the McGuire home a haven was gone, desecrated in silence, hidden behind closed doors, wrapped in guilt and shame. But secrets never stay buried forever. And soon, that hidden sin would become the flame that burned their entire world to ash. The days that followed were steeped in thick, suffocating silence. The kind that wraps around your bones and makes you hyper-aware of every tick of the clock, every creak in the floor, every breath that isn't yours. Sierra stopped sleeping in her own room, not because she didn't have one, but because she no longer felt like she deserved a space to call her own. The innocence that once colored her world had dimmed into something almost unrecognizable. The walls that once displayed her exam calendars, photos with friends, even her dream board with pinned-up college goals, all of it began to feel like props from someone else's life. And her uncles, they weren't the same either. Luke, the initiator, now walked the halls like a man possessed, flushed with twisted confidence, his gaze often smug and proud. He started treating the affair like some deeply personal triumph, whispering lewd compliments into Sierra's ears when no one else was around, grabbing her waist when passing behind her in the kitchen, or simply staring too long across the table. Phil became more methodical and calculating. He would sit beside her during family meals, placing his hand beneath the table on her knee, motionless but claiming territory, while making small talk with the others. He justified it to himself, told Sierra it was a need they all shared and that she was holding the family together. Cameron, oddly, was the quietest. He didn't talk much. He didn't initiate. But when it was his turn to call her up to his room, Sierra would go, reluctantly, fearfully, shamefully. But she'd go. She stopped resisting. It was easier than the shame of confrontation. Easier than hearing the twisted reasons they spun. "You said we're a family," Phil once told her when she cried silently after it was over. "Families protect each other. That's all we're doing now. Protecting this secret." At first, Sierra tried rationalizing. Maybe this was a phase. Maybe they'd stop. Maybe it would all just disappear one day, like a bad dream she could wake up from. But the bad dream deepened, turned darker. Then came the night that sealed everything. Luke showed up at her door with a USB stick in his hand and a guilty smile on his face. "I have a surprise for you," he said. Sierra, curled up in bed, barely acknowledged him. "I don't want any more surprises, Luke." He walked in anyway, sat at the foot of her bed, and plugged the USB into her laptop without asking. "I recorded it," he whispered. Sierra looked up. "Recorded what?" "Our time together that night. The one when all of us were there. I wanted to remember it. Don't you?" Sierra's skin went cold. "Delete it," she said firmly. "Now." But Luke didn't. Instead, he clicked open the folder. The screen flickered to life with a grainy video. Shadows, sheets, voices, moans, her body, Phil's voice, Cameron's back, Luke's laughter. Sierra lunged forward and slammed the laptop shut. "Delete it," she screamed. Luke, startled, took a step back. "Calm down. It's just for us. No one else will ever see it. You recorded it without telling me." She spat, tears welling in her eyes. Luke shrugged. "It's not like we were doing anything holy." That night, Sierra cried harder than she ever had. The shame had gone beyond her skin, beyond her body. It now lived in her bones. The affair had transformed into something monstrous. There was no affection anymore, no illusions of bonding, just degradation and control. She tried avoiding them after that, locked herself in her room, refused meals, stayed silent when they called her name. But they never directly threatened her, never forced their way in. Instead, they guilt her. "You're acting like we're strangers now," Cameron said. "You said we were all in this together," Phil muttered during breakfast. Even Luke, who had once seemed invincible in his cocky demeanor, began to soften in his manipulation. "I get it. You're ashamed. But you think we're not? We're all hurting. You just hurt louder." But Sierra wasn't the only one cracking. Phil started growing paranoid. He would check the USB multiple times a day, even made backup copies, and kept them on his phone. "Just in case something happens," he told Luke. Cameron began drinking more. A glass at dinner, another at midnight, then another until dawn. The guilt was chipping away at him, but not enough to make him confess. Only enough to make him spiral quietly. And Luke kept watching the recording almost every night. He would lie on the living room couch after work, headphones on, laptop screen dimmed, body motionless, eyes locked onto that recording as if it was the only thing that still connected him to Sierra. Until one night, Luke passed out. He had fallen asleep, drunk, the video still playing silently on loop on his phone. The volume was off. The screen was cracked but visible. The last frame frozen on Sierra's face, half hidden beneath a pillow, body arched, hands gripping the edge of the mattress, shadows of her uncles all around her. That was the night Bear returned. He had come home early. The wedding had ended a day ahead of schedule. Fiona and the rest of the family were coming back the next morning, but Bear had urgent business to attend to and chose to travel overnight. He entered the house quietly, expecting everyone to be asleep. The lights were dim, the hallway quiet. He walked into the living room and saw Luke passed out on the couch, snoring slightly, a glass bottle tipped over beside him. Bear walked over, annoyed by the mess, and reached to turn off Luke's phone screen. But something made him pause. Movement. Faint, silent movement on the screen. Curiosity turned to confusion. Confusion turned to horror. He squinted, looked again, then picked up the phone. And there it was, his daughter, Sierra, naked on a bed, surrounded by his brothers, his own flesh and blood, being violated by the very man he had trusted his life with. For a few seconds, Bear couldn't breathe. His heart stilled, his hands trembled. The phone slipped from his grip and landed on the carpet. He sat down, eyes wide, mouth open. He didn't cry. Not yet. He simply stared at the floor for what felt like forever. When he stood up, something in him had already died. He didn't wake Luke, didn't scream, didn't rage. He picked up the phone, transferred the video silently to his own device, then wiped the tears that had finally begun falling. He walked up to Sierra's room. She was asleep, peacefully unaware. He stood in the doorway and stared at her, the way a father stares at his child for the very last time, both with love and with devastation. Something had broken, something that could never be repaired. The next morning, Bear woke earlier than ever before. He called Sierra downstairs. "I've got a surprise for you," he said, smiling. She looked confused, but she followed. He then called his brothers. "Let's meet at the guest house today," he said. "Sierra's exams are done. I want to celebrate." They agreed. They had no idea they were walking into Judgment Day. And Bear was ready, because by then, the man they once knew as a loving brother and father had turned into something else, something colder, something unstoppable. The guest house was nestled 10 kilometers away from the main McGuire residence, private, surrounded by pine trees, and usually reserved for birthdays, anniversaries, or the occasional getaway. It had hosted celebrations, family bonding nights, and laughter-filled evenings. But on this particular day, it would become a graveyard. Bear arrived early that morning with Sierra. He hadn't slept a wink. His mind was numb, his face expressionless, a cold fury boiling underneath. Sierra, still half asleep and slightly confused by his enthusiasm, followed his lead. "Why are we here so early?" she asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You finish your exams. I thought you deserved a surprise, something to celebrate. Just us and a few close ones." He had already bought a cake, chocolate, her favorite, balloons, even paper plates. It was disturbingly normal. Sierra sat at the dining table, while Bear made tea in the kitchenette. She hadn't yet sensed the danger, the weight in the air, the way his hand trembled when it reached for the spoon. She thought maybe her dad was just emotional, proud of her, maybe finally realizing she was an adult now. She didn't know he had seen the video. She didn't know what was coming. At exactly 9:14 in the morning, Luke arrived first, then Cameron, then Phil. Each of them walked in unaware, joking about the drive, the chilly morning breeze, and how Bear was being extra today with his celebration, until Bear gathered them all in the living room. He plugged in his phone to the TV, no emotion in his face, and clicked the first file. The screen flickered to life. Sierra's face appeared, naked, then Phil's voice, then Cameron's hand, then Luke's laugh. The three uncles froze. Sierra stared at the screen, confused for 2 seconds, and then everything drained from her face. She leapt up from the couch, horrified. "Dad, wait. You all," Bear said, interrupting her, his voice trembling with rage. "You did this to her." "Brother, it's not what it looks like," Luke stammered. "Don't you dare call me that," Bear snapped. "You don't get to be my brother." Phil stepped forward, panic rising in his voice. "We were drunk that first time. It just happened," Cameron added. "She begged us not to say anything. We thought it was all just a one-time mistake." "She begged you." Hebert's eyes narrowed. So, you all decided to make her your secret? To keep this going for days, weeks, and record it? He turned to Sierra. And you? You let them do this to you. Sierra fell to the floor, knees buckling, tears flowing endlessly. I didn't know how to stop it, Dad. I didn't. I thought they'd tell you. I thought. Her voice cracked. I thought it was love. Then I thought it was punishment. Then I just stopped thinking. Her sobs echoed in the room. Bear didn't speak. He walked to the small wooden cabinet in the corner and opened the bottom drawer. From inside, he pulled out a silver pistol, a 9mm Beretta he'd kept for home defense. It gleamed in the morning light like a final judgment. Please, Bear, Phil whispered, backing away. We're family. You are monsters, Bear replied. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. His voice was low, controlled, almost sorrowful. Then bang. Phil dropped instantly. Bang. Cameron fell, clutching his chest, gasping as blood soaked his shirt. Luke ran. Bear followed. Please, please, Luke screamed, tripping over the rug, hands in the air. I'll go to the police. I'll confess. You'll rot in hell. Bang. Luke's head snapped back, and he collapsed in a pool of his own blood. Sierra screamed from the corner, covering her ears, shaking uncontrollably. Her entire world had exploded in 7 seconds. Bear turned to her, the father, the protector, the executioner. She looked up through her tears, eyes pleading, begging. Please, please don't. You are my daughter, he whispered. I am your daughter, she sobbed. I made a mistake. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't ask for it. I watched that video, Sierra, he said, voice trembling. You were not just a victim. You participated. I was broken, she screamed. They broke me, Dad. Every day. Silence followed. Then Hebert's hand, holding the gun, began to tremble. His lips quivered. He looked at her like a man caught between love and betrayal. I wish I could unsee it, he whispered. But I can't. Sierra crawled forward. Please, let me fix this. Don't become like them. Tears flooded Hebert's face. He dropped to his knees. The gun hung at his side. Then suddenly, as if overwhelmed by the weight of everything, he stood back up and raised it again. No, Sierra cried. Bang. The shot echoed longer this time. Sierra slumped over, blood spreading beneath her, her final tears still glistening on her cheeks. Then silence. Only the sound of Hebert's sobs remained. He walked outside, knees weak, eyes distant. He stared at the sky, the trees, the birds flying by, as if the world hadn't just ended. Then slowly, he picked up his phone and dialed Fiona. When she answered, cheerful, expecting to hear about the celebration, Hebert's voice broke. They're gone, he whispered. What? Who? All of them, he said. I saw the video. I had to. The phone slipped from Fiona's hand. She collapsed on the kitchen floor, screaming. An hour later, the police arrived. Bear stood at the gate waiting, hands stained with blood. The pistol, unloaded and set on the ground. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just cried. The trial lasted 4 months. Hebert's defense lawyer argued for trauma-induced temporary insanity, emotional breakdown from betrayal, and that Hebert's actions, while extreme, were the product of witnessing incestuous sexual abuse and recording of his daughter by his own brothers. The courtroom saw the video. The jury wept. Fiona testified, sobbing, calling Bear a good man who snapped. Psychologists weighed in. Media swarmed the case. Public opinion was divided. Some called him a hero. Others said he should rot in prison. Sierra's past was dissected. People debated whether she was manipulated or willing. But the truth was, no matter what, she had died broken. At sentencing, Bear stood and spoke. I was not a father that day. I was a storm. I failed her. Not because I pulled the trigger, but because I never protected her before it was too late. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Fiona sold the house. She couldn't bear to walk its halls. The furniture, the kitchen, Sierra's bedroom, all reminders of dreams turned into nightmares. She moved to another city, took up counseling for grieving parents, and never remarried. The McGuire family, once known as a paragon of unity, was now a cautionary tale whispered in the shadows. No tombstones were placed, no funerals were held, just a guest house that stood in silence, its walls still echoing with a father's final heartbreak, and a name, Bear McGuire, that would forever haunt the justice system, not just as a murderer, but as a father who became his own judgment. Thank you for staying with me through this tragic story. If you found this account moving or thought-provoking, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your support allows me to continue bringing you compelling true stories that remind us of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences when it breaks. Until next time, remember that even the most perfect-looking families can hide the darkest secrets.